What's up YouTube, and welcome to another draw along with me, where today we're going to go ahead and create this dragon theme design. Now in the description down below I've left a link to a post over on my Patreon where you can go ahead and grab all the requirements for today's design completely free. There is the subject here at the front, we've got the palette, and also a nice stencil guide as well to aid us through today's design. Again, that's all completely free, so don't stress. It's available on my Patreon where you can go ahead and download all the content you need for today's tutorial. As always, make sure to let me know in the comments down below what you thought of today's design and drop a like while you're there. And of course, subscribe for weekly Procreate content. But if you want even more tutorials from me, I've been posting 3 exclusives every single month to my Patreon supporters, and the catalogue sits at over 90 exclusive tutorials at the time of recording. We're very nearly at 100, and you can get access to all of them when you become a patron. So go ahead and show your support for the channel using the link in the description down below again to visit my Patreon. And with all that said, enjoy today's design and let's get started. So once you've created your canvas and you've added in today's stencil guide, which by the way, I've left a link to, of course, in the description down below, and a guide on how you can do that. But you just need to go up to your actions and go to the option of add and insert it either from your photos or your files, depending on where you saved it to. And you'll be able to see in my layers, I've renamed it guide. So I've kept it at the top, and at the minute it's 100% opacity, and we'll probably adjust that in a second. So now we've got that in play, we can go ahead and just crack on with today's design. So let's go ahead first of all and go to our background color. We'll grab this color here in the bottom right of the palette and hit done. We'll then go ahead and create a new layer and drag it underneath our guide. And then we'll in fact go ahead and create another new layer and swipe from left to right on both and group them together, and we'll rename this and we'll call it sky. So we'll go to our keyboard and we'll call it sky. I always like to group my layers where possible. And then we're going to go to the bottom layer out of the two. We're going to go to our colors and we're going to grab the color in the middle of the far right column. If we go to our brush, we're going to go to airbrushing and the soft brush. Size wants to be a fairly good size that you can just fill in the entire canvas with. So I've gone up to about 24% here. And I'm just going to go left to right across the screen, quite nice and chunky at the bottom, but just blending that up into the night sky above. But we want a lot of that blue. So you want a little bit of the darkness just towards the top. You'll reveal your kind of dragon silhouette as well. So nice and blue towards the bottom and blending that up in towards those darker tones at the top of your sky. We're then going to go ahead and go to our layers. We're going to, just for a moment, go ahead and tap on the sky group and create a new layer above it. And we'll go to our colors and we'll grab this color here in the top left of the palette. And then we're going to go to our brush library. We're going to go to calligraphy and we're going to use the regular old monoline brush. But if we tap on the monoline, I'm going to go to my stabilization for the moment and bring it all the way down on the streamline, and likewise stabilization as well. I want some lovely little tremors and wobbles in there. So if we hit done, we're going to just set our size to something like 5%. And on the guide, you should about be able to see this sort of peak here at the very bottom of our sort of scene here. So I'm going to start over here and I'm just going to create sort of the land and maybe even some additional sort of bumpy, rocky ledges up towards our main sort of plinth where our main subject is going to stand, and then just drag that all the way off to the right hand side. It's not a critical part of the design to get anything sort of unique to, but if you can add some extra bumps and lumps, you just add some more texture to the ground. We'll then go ahead, and once we've done that, we'll add in some stars in our sky. So we're going to go back down to this empty layer in the sky group. We're going to go to our colors. I'm going to grab the bottom color in the second column from the right. And our brush wants to be the option of luminance. We're going to go to the light pen, and I typically max out the size on this and opacity. And then with different varying amounts of pressure, you can press really light in certain areas and create lots of tiny stars. We can press really firm and add in some much needed larger stars. Now I don't want you to come too far down in the design, too much towards the bottom. I want you to kind of focus the main part of your stars up towards the top. And what we're going to do is we're going to give our scene a good amount of coverage with some varying amounts of weights, and the really small ones will look fantastic. But just adding in some stars in the sky in the background of our night scene here. And make sure to just temporarily anyway, just go into where the dragon is as well, because I need you to fill in the entire scene, and I'll explain why in a moment. So we're just filling in the entirety of it. The only thing I'm trying to avoid is if I zoom in on the sort of dragon's mouth, which is here, I'm trying to avoid anything in this kind of area here. I don't want it to kind of look like it's shooting out stars from its mouth. So you can also see I'm just adding a few in the body of it. I just need to give a good general amount of coverage across the entirety of the canvas. You can add in some lots of small ones, and again vary up your sizes, add in some nice punchy larger ones towards the top if you wish, just a little something like this, and I'll add in another one there. So once you've got a really good sort of boxy kind of shape and coverage, go up to the layer and swipe it to the left and duplicate it. Then grab your cursor, using the uniform option, just scale it down to around about like a quarter of the size. And then once you've done that, tap on your cursor when you're done, and then just move it around a little bit, maybe move it up towards the top left, and then duplicate that layer. So now you're just filling in like the quadrants of the sky. And I'm going to duplicate that again, so swiping it to the left and duplicating it every time. Maybe even this time I'll flip it horizontally and vertically as well. Or we maybe even let's rotate it. Let's just make sure we're trying to avoid any sort of easy repetition. So I'll flip that way instead. And then I'll swipe it to the left and duplicate that again. I'll flip that horizontally and I'll move that across into this space over here. And then maybe even I'll swipe that to the left and duplicate it, move it across a little bit into this kind of gap here. What we're doing is we're compressing all the stars down, making a lot of the really tiny ones. So now you can pinch all of your stars together and you've got this amazing amount of coverage in the sky. And you can go ahead and maybe even swipe that to the left and duplicate that and, scale that down in size if you really want to and cover in the entirety of the screen. I'm pretty happy with my coverage, so I'm going to leave mine as it is. The only thing with mine is it doesn't quite reach to the edges just enough. So either I can go ahead and add some more stars in here and just push them right towards the edge of the canvas, getting rid of that kind of boxy look to it almost, just to make sure it doesn't look like just a print of stars. And then you should have some wicked coverage like so, and the odd one that strays a little bit further down is also perfectly fine. The next stage is to then go ahead and create some of the red glows. Now the red glows are going to be separate from the sky, so we're going to collapse the sky group down for a moment and we're going to create two new layers. Swipe from left to right, group them together, and we're going to rename this group. We're going to call it glows. So we're going to grab our keyboard and we'll call it glows. And then in this group, we're going to go to the bottom layer out of the two. We're going to go to our colors and grab the color in the top right of the palette. Go back to your brush and go to airbrushing and the soft brush. And we're going to go ahead and add in a glow at the bottom. So I'm just going to set my brush size to around about 21% here. And we're going up to roughly just below halfway of our canvas. So I'm going to go really firm in behind here, adding in a good solid amount of color. Then I'm going to go kind of round in two sort of areas. I'm going to kind of just circular motion, just add in some, I want a gradient, but I don't want it to be perfect, like straight line across. It's really boring. I want to add in like a variety, and then just lightly just push that color up the design just a tiny bit up towards kind of the midpoint, but making sure, especially down here, like in behind our dragon, that it's got a good amount of red coverage. So it's just got an ever so slightly uneven wobble to the top surface there, and a lovely solid amount of red towards the bottom. That's what we're aiming for. Let's then go ahead and add in an additional glow here. So we're going to go ahead and on the layer above it, we're going to go to our colors. We're going to go ahead and we're going to grab this color here just beside it, the top of the second column from the right. That soft airbrush needs to be a lot smaller, probably around about that 10 to 15% range. And just in behind here, just in behind your sort of main sort of plinth up here, going to go round in a circular motion, starting to build in a bit of a glow here. So start off sort of with a small glow, and you can press really firm in here. That's where we want the brightest area to be. I'm then going to go ahead and make the brush size a bit bigger though, so I can add in a bit of a wider spread of that. And then I'll just push it a little bit below and behind the rocks here, but just a sort of nice big red glow coming from just behind that sort of top area of the rock. And I've gone back down to a 12% there just to make sure it is nice and colourful. Maybe even I can push that up ever so slightly, just sort of increasing the height of that glow in the centre. So a nice lovely glow, pushing that off to the sides. Now we can go ahead and add in some cloud work, so we can go ahead and create another new layer. I'm going to set the blend mode on this one from normal to the option of color dodge. So color dodge, we're going to go to our colors. We're going to go ahead and I think we're going to grab this color here at the top of the 6th column there, this color here on its own. We're going to go to our brush, we're going to go into elements, and we're going to use the clouds brush. Now I've got my opacity set quite low, about 41%, and the size is initially set to around about 15%, which is probably a little bit too small. Let's go up to a larger size to start with, about 26%. And we're going to just lightly towards the bottom. Our pressure is obviously quite light, and so is our opacity, so we can build up. We want to just press a little bit firmer towards the very bottom edge and build in some cloud work at the bottom, and then lightly just bring up the screen with a lighter sort of coverage that makes its way a little bit higher. So you can see there, that's a prime example of what we're trying to do. Towards the bottom here now we've got the brighter tone, and then as you make your way a little bit higher, the sort of misty, sort of smoky effect gets a little bit more faded out. Now I've gone back down to 15%, and I'm just going to add in a few strays that are just going to run a little bit higher and just add in a little bit more smoke and sort of effects that just make their way a little bit higher. Down here in the bottom right, I think I'm going to try and get away with like a big strong amount of cloud there, and then a few here as well. Now you can also add some in front of your dragon as well, so I can just start to prepare that a little bit in here. A couple of clouds in here, just a little bit like so. It's just going to rest in front of our dragon. And then maybe let's take a look at that. I think we could maybe get away with like another maybe sort of banking over there on the right. It wants to be nice and random. You don't want to just create wave and then a wave. Keep it nice and sort of uneven. That's something I'm trying to practice a little bit, trying to make sure my work is a little bit uneven from time to time and not super symmetrical. So once you've got a lovely amount of coverage like this and all these wicked glows, we can move on to the next part, which is going to be bodying in the dragon. So we're going to go ahead, we're going to collapse the glows down for a moment, and we're going to tap on our sky group and create 2 new layers again and swipe from left to right on both. Group them together and we'll rename this and we'll call it dragon. And the bottom layer out of the 2, I'm going to go to my colors. I'm going to go to this color here, the top of the 4th column. I'm going to go to my brush and I'm going to go back to calligraphy and the monoline brush to start with. I'm going to tap on it though at this occasion. I'm going to go back to that stabilization. I'm going to bring it all the way up to max again, and 50% is my usual sort of stabilization area where I can get some nice smooth lines, but I get a little bit of sort of movement in there. And if I hit done, my size is going to be set to 5%, and we're just going to draw in the body of the dragon. Now, if you can't see your guide too well, just simply tap on your guide at the top and use this option here of invert. So the guide is currently black, and if you invert it, it flips to the opposite, which is white. And if we just bring the opacity down of that just a little bit, because that's probably a little bit too bright, I need to see my lines. I'm just going to bring it down to 30% opacity. Now, if we go back to this layer here in dragons, I've got a little mark on it, so I'll clear it. We're going to go ahead and draw in that body. So we're going to start off first of all with this swooping shape, and you want to make sure you run it in behind your rocks down here. So I'm going to start at the top here. I'm going to just run that down and let that just swoop down all the way down towards the edge of the canvas. And then you can go ahead and maybe start just here, like just beside the mouth, and then just create that lovely swooping line all the way down. And once you've done that, just to triple check, you may want to just like link those together and then drag and drop the color in, just so you can see that body there. Make sure you're happy with the curvature of it. And then from there, we can just block in the rest of it. So in today's design, of course, I've provided a stencil guide, so we can work against that. And it will just make life a little bit easier if you've not drawn dragons before, as neither have I. So it just makes life a little bit easier based on my initial practices. They won't always be available, but sometimes I will provide them. Just bringing the monoline down to its smallest size, just seeing if I can maybe get in some of these. And at the minute, my brush head there is a little bit too big. So I'll just get the main shapes in first. So we're going to come down this line here, which is the opposite side of the mouth. And then we'll come along the top edge here. And if you want to, you could go ahead and lower your stabilization on the monoline brush at this point. You know, maybe bring that down, bring this down again, so we can get some additional tremors and wobbles in there should we want them. So I've just dropped that down. I'll hit done. And then if we go round the nose here, I should be able to create these 2 nostril areas there. So just following the guide along there. I'm going to go along the head and up into these sort of brow points up here. Lovely. And then we're going to make our way along here. Now, I think my brush size should be okay for the moment, so I'm just going to continue on and create these points up here. Potentially I may need to sharpen them in a moment, but I'm creating all of the sort of zigzag lines that I've created here for these sort of head areas, these sort of headpiece areas. I've got all these sort of trailing off, really aggressive, sharp lines in here. I'm going to create another one here and let that just run down. I'm trying to create like a intentional little wobbles here and there just to show like the uneven kind of boniness of it a little bit more. And then like down into here where I'll run that back into the back of the head. Now I should have created enough of a loop there where I can drag and drop the color in just to block that in. And I have indeed. And then here I'm just going to try and just let that run into the head a little bit more. So I'm just deviating ever so slightly from the design, just or the stencil even, just a little bit there. And then on the back of your dragon, you should be able to see these lines that make their way out. They are little guidelines here, and you just need to sort of run your pen out, create like a little bit of a point, and then run it back in. So a bit of a triangle and then drag it in. These are all kind of the spiny spikes that just run down the back of our dragon here into the spine. So we're just going to create these larger ones to start with, and then we'll create some mini details in the gaps. So try to make them, potentially a little bit wobbly here and there. Potentially some of them are a little bit skinnier as well. So maybe like you create a bit of a thinner one like this one here, and just vary them up where you can, or where you think like a little bit of extra detail may look pretty nice and applicable. And then as we get a little bit lower down, I'm just going to sort of curve this one a little bit as well, just to kind of follow the curve of the body as it's making its way down away from us. And then potentially we can then take a look, see if we want to make any adjustments to those. I don't think I do. So I'm going to zoom in. I'm just going to turn off my guide for a minute so that you can see my work perfectly. And then I'm going to go ahead and go to my brush. I'm going to change it. I'm going to bring in the studio pen. So I believe it's under inking and the studio pen. I've got maximum opacity, a small brush size around about 8%, because this brush will allow us to create sort of very thin points here and there. So I just want to wiggle my pen along here, creating like a bony kind of spine-like shape here and there, and just add in little details that you can just about make out on the back there of your dragon. Now, they don't need to necessarily be super fine details or anything like that, because they're going to get somewhat lost. They are just a silhouette at this point. I just want to add in enough sort of bumps and lumps in there just to show that, the surface is not smooth and then just large spikes making their way out. You could even like run like a little smaller one in this little gap here, for example, just to add in general, just a nice coverage of like the spiny spikiness to the dragon. So let's come down here. They don't need to be perfect in any way. They can, be nice and sort of quite uniformed even in a way of just, they don't need to be unique is what I'm trying to say. They don't need to be anything sort of special in that aspect. And then I'm just going to let them just run into the body. So they just sort of disappear in behind there. And maybe I'll add like another sort of spike there and exaggerate this one just a little bit at the top here. Try and maybe create a bit more of an aggressive look. And these are all going to be the fun things that when I start to do a few more dragons that we'll start to pick up and practice over time and develop different sort of aesthetics to all of these. Now we're going to go ahead, and while we've got this brush, we're going to turn on our guide again. We're going to zoom in, and we've got all these areas here on the face to detail in. So we're just going to create all of these shapes here. So at this point, we're just following that guide, because I don't want people to sort of have to sort of stress over this. And I always sort of back up why I provide a guide. But, if you're confident enough and you can draw something, or even just look at my guide as a reference rather than sort of use it as a layer, I do encourage you to do that. I want you to try and be confident in your work that you do and see what you can do that's, a bit more of a challenge for you that you're happy to take on board. But for a lot of people, especially for me, I've not drawn a dragon before, and this is a good stencil guide based off of my initial practices of creating this. And you'll have seen me draw this live on stream potentially on my channel. And we use the guide in that too. So just blocking in all those teeth, and then we're going to do the same at the top here, blocking in the teeth. We'll move on in a second to the eye and creating that. Just blocking in those teeth. It's quite a quick process really. We're just drawing those in, keeping it nice and simple, just creating all these little triangular shapes. Again, as I always say, don't get lost in the details in a sense, because when you zoom out, those teeth are fairly small, but they just added a lot of character to the top of the head there. Now at this point, we are actually done with our guide in terms of that aspect of drawing in the body. The layer above it, let's go ahead and go to that layer and go to our colors. We're going to grab this red here, this really vibrant one, the middle of the 5th column there. And we're going to zoom in on the eye and just create that shape. So it's like a bit of a curve at the top into a point. It curves down a little bit and then in towards like the inner part of the eye a little bit. So it's got that little bit of a dip in there. So now we've got the shapes of our dragon. We can go ahead and turn off our guide for a moment. We've got all of those in play. Let's just quickly finish the eye, because that's quite a simple thing to do. We're going to swipe it to the left and duplicate it. I'll swipe on both of these for a minute and group them together. So we've got a group within a group, and we're going to rename this and call it eye. So that's really good practice. If you've got like a certain element that you want to maybe separate, or once you're done with it, you want to hide those layers, just group it within a group. Just makes life a lot easier. And then we're going to swipe it to the left again and duplicate it once more. So we should have 3 of those eyes. The top one, just for a minute, go to your colors. We want to go ahead and we want to grab this color here, the bottom of the 5th column, and drag the color into it. So now it's going to end up with this more sort of lighter tone. We're going to change the color though from normal to color dodge. And then the one underneath it, so we're going to go to, in fact, to the very bottom one out of the three. We'll go to our adjustments, we'll go to Gaussian blur, and we'll swipe from left to right, and we're going to add in roughly around about a 9 or 10% glow here, just to give that eye a really wide diffuse bit of lighting. And then we'll go up to our layers, we'll go up a layer to the one underneath, and we'll tap on it and change the blend mode from normal to add. And we'll go ahead and go to our adjustments, Gaussian blur, and we'll swipe from left to right, and now we can give that eye a really mean glow. So roughly around about 5% will look wicked, and tap on your adjustments when you're done. And now your eye should have this wicked glow in it. You could compress those layers down if you want. You could tap on the eye group, tap on it and flatten it, because it is done with. Now, one subtle adjustment we're going to make here is we're going to go to our dragon, we're going to tap on it, and we're going to alpha lock it. We're going to go ahead and go to our brush. We're going to go to airbrushing and the soft brush again, and probably the brush size around about sort of 20 to 25%. We're going to go to our colors, and we're going to grab this color here, the middle of the fourth column, and we're just going to blend this up a little bit from the bottom, so roughly up to about midway. So it's just a very subtle change between the sort of dark color and a bit more of a lighter purple. It's extremely subtle. You might not even be able to see it too much, but it's just a little detail I wanted to add in. We're then going to go ahead and we're going to add a glow to the chest of our dragon. So we'll create a new layer, we'll tap on it and we'll clipping mask it. We'll go to our colors. We're going to go ahead and we're going to grab the top color here in the fifth column. Same brush as before, the soft airbrush, a size that's manageable. So we're going to bring that down to probably something maybe around about 6%, 6 to 8, something around there. I'm just triple checking that that layer is set up correctly, and it is. So we're going to start up here just underneath in this space here, and we're just going to add in a glow to the body like so. So just as you get a little bit further down, you can press a little bit firmer, add in a bit more color. But ultimately you want this right edge over here to have a bit of color up here like so. So just a nice little blend out. You may want to redo that a couple of times if you've made it a little bit too solid, but I'm happy with mine as it is. Let's then go ahead and add in the texture to add on to this particular part of the body. So we'll go ahead and we'll create a new layer. We're going to tap on it and clipping mask it and change the blend mode from normal. We're going to change it to add. We're going to go to our brush library. We're going to go into materials and we're going to use this one here, the Fernex brush. I probably butchered that. If we tap on the Fernex brush and we actually go ahead and go to the option of grain, we're going to take a look at the scale and we're just going to bring that down. We could bring that down to maybe around about sort of 15% and then hit done. Now we've adjusted the scale then technically of what I'm going to use as the scales. Now just in case you need to, once you're done, swipe the brush to the left and reset it. That way it will go back to normal, just in case another tutor potentially does a tutorial with it. My brush size is set to around about 52%, and I'm just going to go ahead and just stroke down that bright area that we created and maybe a slight bit off to the left, just ever so slightly if you want to, just a very light coverage as it blends around. But ultimately you can just add in that really nice kind of scaly effect on the body of our dragon. Now again, just as good practice, we'll go back up to it, we'll swipe it to the left and we'll reset it and hit reset. So then it goes back to normal. Let's then go ahead and add in some details that I need to add, such as adding in some downward lighting before we add in some glows. Now we're going to go ahead and create a new layer, tap on it and clipping mask it into this stack. We're going to go ahead and keep the same color, but we're going to go to our brush. We're going to go into inking and we're going to use the ink bleed brush. We're going to set the opacity to about 50% and the size can be around about 11. We're going to go ahead and we're going to zoom in on our dragon. We're going to add in some subtle details to get started. So for example, all these little spikes that stick out, we're going to add in a bit of an underglow to them. And then you can kind of just scratch in some little additional sort of levels of detail here. And then you could maybe detail some of these little bumps and lumps. I would argue that when you're at this sort of scale down here at the bottom, no pun intended, you just want to kind of brighten up the left edge here just a little bit, and the brush is set to 50%, so if you want to brighten it up you can go back over it. You could go ahead and just sort of bring in a little bit more color potentially, wrapping it around. You could add in some mini details here and there. We're just adding in that underlighting, so it's most important on these little sort of spikes here. And then I'm kind of just adding in some additional sort of lines and strokes in here just to add in some additional areas of lighting, and these will just really help later on. We're just showing how that lighting is just really shining all the way up our dragon. I'm just adding in some there on the back of this one, and repeating all the way up, essentially taking a look at the design and saying, where would that lighting catch? So as we make our way up here, we can add some onto here, we can add some on the back here, and it's predominantly going to be just on the back end over here for a moment. I think I can go up to around about there, and then I'm going to have to stop. So I'll probably just add a little bit on the back edge of there, and then leave that as is. So it's just mainly on that back edge. So take a look at mine there and try to sort of replicate that part of the design here. Now, before we carry on with the rest of the dragon, I want to just introduce the rest of the elements that are going to go in the sky back here. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my layers. I'm going to go ahead and collapse the dragon group down for a minute. I'm going to open up the sky again. We've got our stars here, and we've got our glow in behind. So we're going to go ahead and tap on that sort of gradient and create a new layer. We're going to go to our colors. We're going to go ahead and grab this bright blue or tealy color here in the middle of the second column from the right. Your brush wants to be set to airbrushing in the soft brush. If we set that to around about sort of 12 to 15%, we can go ahead and just lightly start to patch in a big area of kind of blue up here in the sky, and maybe drag that out in different ways, and a little patch down here maybe. But ultimately, this blue is going to help with our reds because it gives you that contrast and the sort of complementary kind of colors against each other, and it'll also add in some sort of good separation for your dragon. It will help it stand off from the sky a little bit. So introduce that color and try to sort of, you want to kind of focus it a little bit around the head, a little bit like so that you can bring that silhouette out a little bit more. So I know I said a little bit, maybe a lot there, but apologies. We'll go ahead then and we'll move on to then adding in some kind of nebula details here. So we'll go ahead and create another new layer. We'll go to our brush, we'll change it to the option of luminance, and we'll grab the nebula brush. We'll go for a fairly high opacity, around about 70%, but the brush size probably wants to start off around about sort of 7%. Keep it really, really light with your pressure, and maybe just sort of drag up here and try and just create some variation in that sort of blue tone that we created before. So just really, really light. I'm very sort of scarce with it, to the point where you can only see like a couple of patches there. We don't need to add in tons. And we can introduce like a 5% in the smaller areas potentially. So like a little bit on the top edge of there maybe. And maybe a tiny little bit down here on its own. And just like a little streak down there potentially. Just to add in some more detail. And something else going on in the sky. And then we can go ahead and we can add in some mini details. So we can create another new layer, but we'll change the blend mode on this one from normal to overlay. Change it to overlay. We'll bring the brush size down to around about 2%, and we're just going to go ahead and try and draw in some sort of, cosmic kind of effect happening here. We're trying to sort of invoke a bit of a magical theme in this design. So I'm just in these areas, just trying to add in a bit more of a cosmic look to it in the sky. Nothing too intense, just certain areas that are a little bit brighter potentially. You don't have to add it absolutely everywhere either. And try and avoid, again, anything really coming from sort of the mouth there of the dragon. We don't want to kind of show that it's spewing out a galaxy. That's not the vibe we're going for. So just a little bit of cosmic kind of vibe in the background. It's always a favorite of mine to do, and a little bit magical in the sky. So that looks pretty good. It's pretty subtle, and I like how that looks. So we're going to leave that for a moment as it is. We'll move on to the next part, which is going to be adding in some sparkle kind of effects and lighting on our dragon, and really bringing out some facial features of it as well. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to go into our glows group. We're going to open that up. We're going to go above our little clouds layer. We're going to create a new layer. We're going to change the blend mode from normal to color dodge as well. We are going to go to our colors, and we're going to grab the top color in the 5th column. Our brush wants to be set to the option of luminance, but we're going to go into the light pen. Now, before we use this brush, let's just have a conversation quickly about pressure, because this particular brush, I want you to be able to create these really, really light lines, but they're going to predominantly be red. You can see if I press almost with like natural pressure, they get really big and really white. This line here, the bottom one, was using literally I'm just very lightly passing my pen across the screen. And when I say really lightly, we're talking literally like 5% of like a normal pressure. It's very, very light. I'm being super delicate. So if you struggle with that, just go up to your actions and go to your pressure and smoothing. So go on actions, preferences. We're going to go to pressure and smoothing. Now, my app pressure has always been the default. But if you drag this node here along a little bit like so So you can go along here. You can press with a little bit more force, but get those thin lines. So that way you've got a little bit more sort of leeway with the low end of your pressure. You can press like a little bit harder, and that's essentially the equivalent of 0% pressure. So I'm going to go ahead and reset mine back, but I just wanted to show you that just in case you do struggle with pressure, that's a really good way of adjusting it to fit for today's design. So we're going to go ahead, let's do our dragon first. So we're going to work on top of a few lines here. I'm going to start off really, really lightly and come down the back end of the dragon and down a little bit. If you press a little bit too firm in certain areas, you can always go ahead and grab your eraser, tap on your eraser and use the soft brush under airbrushing. And if you want to, you can just feather out the ends of some of your lines, let them like nicely taper off potentially. So there, I can just take away a little bit of that and leave a little bit of a glow on that side. That's fine. We do want a little bit of a glowy effect. But sometimes I struggle with the pressure in a sense. It's really easy for me to just do them quite bright. So I want to just take a look. I want them to predominantly be red. So I'm going to keeping my pressure as light as possible. And I'm not going to go ahead and do like every line almost exactly the same. You know, we want to show like a little bit of variation in how the lighting is catching. And when I say I am touching the screen really lightly, I'm probably at like a 1 or 2% of how much pressure I'm actually pressing on the screen. Like it's so light and gentle. Here, this one could probably get a little bit of love and a little bit of upward lighting on it. So we'll add some good color on that one. And then maybe this one too, you know, it does face predominantly quite low down. So we can add in some good color on there. As we get a little bit further up, maybe that lighting starts to sort of tail off a tiny bit. But I want to just, for artistic liberties, you know, add in like a nice sort of glow here and there on certain areas at the top here. And I will definitely go back in with my eraser at some point and just try and blend out a few of those points. I can see I've got a little bit of a gap there. I can come back and fix that later on in the design. I've got a little bit of gap in the kind of horns up here. And these kind of effects where you just leave little gaps here and there shows that you're maybe taking considerations for where the light's catching and where it's not. You know, certain surfaces are facing the correct way, so you can add in some lighting that's pointing downwards. Now you don't have to do every single point, so I'm going to leave that one. And I'll move on to this one over here. I think I'll just add in like a bit more of a glow on that one at the top. That one's probably a little bit heavy. I'm going to redo that one. Sometimes I like to keep in my little sort of, I say mistakes, or they're usually just retries, just so you know what to aim for, same as me then. And I think those colors at the top there, they just help so much with just adding in this like magical effect. Now we need to add some to the underside of a lot of these facial features. So let's zoom in on our canvas as its normal orientation, and then I can go ahead and go down this edge here of the sort of beardy almost area here underneath our dragon. Add in some color along these ones. You don't want to go over the top with it, but some nice under lighting will look fantastic. One thing we're going to go ahead and do is add in some facial features in a minute as well, some structure to the face, so we can use this brush to do that. So hopefully you're not struggling with it. Hopefully my little sort of a demo there of lowering your opacity will really help, because this particular brush just looks so cool with this type of effect. Now what we can go ahead and do is add in some of the facial features. So the mouth, for example, comes down. You can turn on your guide if you need to. The mouth comes down into here, and then it kind of runs down along there as well. So you kind of separate the front of the dragon's face from the back. So like this is the back area here. So you could add in some color in there and maybe even like a line or two in there just for detail. And then we're going to look at the sort of jaw here and imagine how that kind of swoops off, and dragons have those lovely kind of flared off kind of effects. So I can go ahead, for example, and just run along there and then just let that kind of just drape off. Now that's really bright. I'm probably going to redo that, but that's kind of the effect that we're going for. So just like these little sort of drag offs here, like so, will just help outline the facial features of your dragon. You could create a second one underneath it if you want to, like these little flick offs. And again, just grab your eraser if it's a little bit too bright and just blend that out. Take away like some width of it, so like cut into it like I'm doing there. You can just adjust as you need to, create those lovely little flick offs at the bottom. We'll keep going because there's more that we can add in here. We're going to add one off of the eye as well. So we're going to come round here and then like a little flick off like here too. And we can add in some more in the face. So maybe there's an additional line of detail in here. And then maybe like there's one that sort of droops in from this side up here at the top. Little something like that. And I think all of these tiny little areas are just areas where like the lighting is just catching. So now I can sort of blend that one out a little bit up here. Blend that out on this end here as it runs into the face. I think we could probably blend that one too, and definitely blend that one out. That one's a little bit too long of a tail on it, so I'm just blending that out. Go to our brush. Can we add in any more? I think we could just maybe add in like the odd little bump and lump in here. So like a little area where the lighting again is just catching on something, a little sort of piece of the facial structure. We're starting off really light with these sort of dragon designs. So here I'm just adding in another one and then blending it out on the edges. We don't want to sort of get into doing the details too early. You don't want to jump into something you've never drawn before too heavily, too quickly. Just like these silhouette designs are really sort of good because you can build up towards it. So that is all the kind of details that I want to add in the dragon's face. So take a look at mine and just triple check yours matches up, or you've maybe done something slightly different, whatever you're happy with. Now the only adjustment we just need to quickly make is where we've got this kind of texture, I can see that it runs up a little bit up into what I've just designated as the jaw. So I'm just going to go ahead and go back into my dragon. I've got the texture layer here. I'll grab my eraser, and all I'm going to do with a soft airbrush is just make sure with a good size that I can clear all of this out. So get rid of all that texture that runs on the body. We don't want it to run up onto the face. And then maybe I'll just blend that out a little bit underneath the jaw there, just to add in like a bit of a separation between the body texture and the face details, giving that nice allocation of space to each area. Let's then go ahead and move on to the glows again, but at the bottom. So we're going to carry on with the glows on that same layer, same brush as what we were using before, except now we're going to create all these little sort of magical kind of sparks almost, and explosion kind of areas down here. So particle kind of effects. So we're going to take a look, we're going to see if we can create some like kind of explosive lines, different weights, different pressures, different sizes of these little sort of sparky areas. Try not to sort of do too much repetition in here, but some nice detailed areas down towards the bottom here, right behind what will be our subject, which we'll introduce shortly. Adding in these wicked little sparks here and there. You can add a few in the middle. You can add in some long sort of streak lines. You can add in sort of bits like this where it's sort of chunkier on the end and it's got a bit of a tail on it, as if that's flying outwards, up and out. Varying amounts of sizes and scale will look fantastic in here, and just lack of repetition and pattern will look fantastic. So add in some streaks here and there, add in some blobs like the bigger one up there that I created, and all these little sort of lovely cool glows down here. Taking a look at that, we've got a big explosion there. I'm going to undo a few of those. I'm going to sort of drag the explosion out a little bit more, create sort of real sort of flying bits of debris potentially, but it adds, in my opinion, to like the magical kind of effect, or these kind of little sparkles, etc. It shows that something's going on in the environment, and it's something I'm trying to work on as well in my designs recently. So that's something you may see occur a few more times in some of my designs. Couple more strays up here. Try and leave gaps. Potentially you might want to get in there in a minute and delete a few, you know, maybe use your eraser and just crack on and get rid of a few of them, just to add in some like spaces and areas where the detail can be separated. That's got a lovely amount of quantity in there. Let's go ahead and see if we can kind of replicate that to an extent over here. And you can add in lots of really light ones and they'll just have like a really kind of like light red look to them. Now, while you are in this process, go ahead though and create another new layer and change the blend mode again from normal to color dodge. You could have done it on the same layer, but I wanted you to be able to separate them if needs be. We were currently using the top of the fifth column. If we use this brighter red here in the middle of the fifth column, look at the difference between the colors here. If I dash in here and I press really firm, I end up with these kind of redder tones, like really warm tones. So I'm going to go ahead now and just try and vary up the sort of colors in here a little bit by adding in a few of these areas here with this much more red tone, and try and just add in some variety so that all the colors are not the same. We've got some nice red flared color in here. I'm trying to leave gaps in certain areas. I'm trying not to keep it sort of too repetitive in here, but just a few flying out, maybe even like a really big red one over here somewhere, just making its way up and away from the design. And just a few like in behind your surface as well, like your land here, you know, that'll just aid the design as well. It doesn't always have to come from like beyond it, it can come from behind it. I will switch my color back though to the top of the fifth column and go back to the other layer, so the one that we had all of our glows on. See if we can just add in any areas here that I think will look really cool. I think another sort of long high one up there might look quite smart. I think it could do with being a little bit higher potentially. And then over here, I'm going to add in a few more strays right off at the edge of the design, spreading that kind of magical effect beyond. So let's see if we can just wrap this part up. I would urge you to spend as long as you like on here. Don't add in too much though. We've got more effects to add in here, one of which is a nice bokeh effect, but potentially you might want to come back to it and erase certain bits, maybe make space for other areas of content that you think would look quite smart. So I'll add in another one up there, and I think that looks pretty good for coverage. So I'm going to leave that as it is for a moment. The next step, as I mentioned, is to add in some bokeh effects. So we're going to go ahead and we'll create a new layer in the glows group at the top. We'll change the blend mode from normal to add. We're going to go ahead and we're going to keep the same color for a minute, the top here of that fifth column. But we're going to go to our brush and we're going to go into luminance and the bokeh lights. Swipe it to the left and reset it, just in case you've previously made any adjustments to it. So I've just reset it. We're going to open up the bokeh lights and we're going to tap on it. We're going to go to color dynamics, and the bokeh usually uses a lot of hue, meaning when you select red, it's going to use 23% below and above as like the barrier, so it can pick a color anywhere in between there. But I want to stick to these nice red tones, so I'm going to bring this all the way down to 3% here and then hit done. So now it can't stretch too far away from the original color that I selected, which is red. We're going to bring that brush size down to something quite small, around about sort of 4 to 5% in here. And then in here, you can now add in these wicked bokeh effects and just dash them in, create lots more magic in here and additions to the sort of particle kind of effects that are happening in here. So add in some nice small ones to start with. Don't do too many of the small ones initially. Then bring your brush size gradually up. So let's go up to like a 8% now and dash in some maybe much needed sort of medium sized ones. I'm going to leave the 8% already. I'm going to go up to around about 14%. Add in some larger ones. Can we add in some up the body? I think that looks great, and I'm going to leave that. I think that's just a really cool kind of explosion effect. You can add in a couple that are a little bit stray up here. And again, to me, this is just adding into the kind of particle kind of styling that I think looks really magical and fantastic. So I've just stretched out a few of those there. And you can go even bigger again. You could go up to something maybe around about 22% maybe, and see if you can maybe even go bigger than that, maybe 26. See if you can just get the brush to land in a certain area. There is a bit of a frustration with this brush at times, but I've got a large one there, a couple here as well, and it's quite random, so just mess around with it. That to me is probably a little bit too much. But when it builds with the sparkles that we created before, I think it just creates this overall wicked effect. We could probably make that around about sort of 13% again, and maybe have the odd stray really, really light. Look at the difference there, just two really, really, really light ones up in the top there, and maybe a couple over to the right. Try and spread out that magic effect a little bit. It doesn't have to be even, so I'll leave that side as it is. And that's looking wicked. So I'm going to go ahead and leave that for a minute, because I think we can easily overdo it, but we could always come back to it, which is the best thing about it. Now at this point, we're going to go ahead and add in our subject that's going to stand here. So we're going to go ahead and go up to our layers. We're going to go above our little piece of land here and create a new layer. So we've got an empty layer. And you're going to want to go ahead and go up to your actions and hit the option of add and insert the subject image that I've provided for you is as either, if you've saved it in your files, grab it from your files, or insert it as a photo, whichever one you've done. And then it should drop it onto the screen, and it doesn't matter what size it looks like initially. All we need to do is scale it down and pop it on the top here. Now, with something like this, the larger you make your subject, the smaller you make your dragon. So the smaller we make our subject, the more grand and big our subject's gonna look, our dragon should I say. So we can make this nice and small down here. We could bring that down to a good size. Zoom out though till you get the whole scale, but look at the scale then of like the person against just the head alone. You can get an idea for how large the dragon is. So you can pick and choose how big or small you want to make yours. I think the smaller you can make it, the more confident you are about how it looks. And also we can just see the grandness of how big that dragon is. So I'm just going to move it ever so slightly off to the right onto the very top of my mound there. In fact, I may just move it ever so slightly off to the left. So I'm being a bit of a perfectionist there. So I've moved it off to the left ever so slightly, and we've got our wizard in play. Let's then go ahead and add in a few effects first of all to this land. So we're going to go ahead and go onto the land. I'm going to create a new layer and tap on it and clip it to the land. I'm going to go to my colors, and you've got two colors to pick from. You've got this sort of purpley tone or the one at the bottom. Either looks fine. I couldn't really pick, to be honest. So I'm going to grab the bottom one. I'm going to go to my brush, and I'm going to go to the option of drawing and the Blackburn brush. Size is going to be set to 10%. And all I want you to do is just very lightly kind of just streak in some like land kind of effects here. Just streaking it in, creating some land areas here with some really loose sort of strokes of your brush here, coming over the top of here and then kind of swooping up towards the top of our little sort of rocky little plinth here for our subject to stand on. So just a little bit up towards in behind, nothing too much just behind them. We want to kind of shadow that in a little bit. So I may even like swoop this one down a little bit, add in some additional levels of just land and just painting kind of aesthetic to it, a little bit like so. And that looks pretty good, just nice and simple and minimal. We're not trying to add anything too detailed here. This is very much in the shadows. So once you've got a good little effect going on like this, I'm just going to block in a bit of color there. And maybe I'll add in another little sort of streak just in the middle, just to add in a bit of something in this middle area. We'll leave that now and we'll move on to our wizard and the glowy effects. So we're going to go ahead and we will first of all create a new layer that's going to sit underneath. We're going to go ahead and go to our colors. I'm going to grab this blue here, the middle of the far right column. Your brush wants to then be set to the option of the luminance again. So we're going to go into luminance, going to go to the light pen. Probably going to have to set this quite small. I'll set it to 21% because we're going to add in a bit of a glow in here inside the staff. So we're going to go ahead and just add in a bit of a glow here, and it'll probably lose a lot of its color. But you can just maybe stretch that up a tiny bit and add in like a bit of a glow from it. So that's where the kind of magic is going to be coming from. And you can add in a few little sort of mini little streaks off from there if you wish, just like a few running astray. We're going to add in some sort of extra lines later on. We're then going to go ahead and go to our layers. We're going to go to our layer that we were just working on and create a new one above it. Change the blend mode from normal to color dodge. We're going to go to our brush. We're going to go to airbrushing and the soft brush. And we're going to need to create some glows around our subject. So I think around about 20% is too big. We'll bring that down. We'll bring that down to around about sort of 12% maybe. And we're just going to tap a few times here just to create like a bit of a glow here. So a really light glow in there. And then you could probably bring your brush size down just a little bit to around about 3%. And then just around your sort of point here of your stuff, you could just create an additional little bit of glow. So we're adding in that lighting. And while we've done that, we'll just quickly go ahead and add some lighting to our subject. So we'll tap on our subject and create a new layer and tap on it and clip it to it. Same color, but we'll go to our brush. We'll go back to the option of luminance and the light pen. Again, keeping your brush really, really light. Size-wise, that size is pretty good. What size is that? 21%. I'm going to go ahead and just brighten up the side of the hat here. We'll go ahead and do sort of the hat as well here. And then you can add in some like smaller details in here, like just like the folding of the hat, that like a bit of an aged hat potentially. A little bit down here, a little bit on the top of the hands there. Could probably add a tiny bit down the staff. Definitely down the opposite side and then down this arm, let that trail out, and on the top of the hands too. And that should just be enough detail just to sort of really bring out a lot of the elements of your subject there, this little wizard here at the bottom. Now zooming out, we just want to triple check how that's looking. That's looking pretty sweet. Let's go ahead now and add in the nice magical effects coming off of the staff. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to create a new layer underneath our subject. We're going to create a new layer. We will drag it down though. We'll drag it down just above that sort of texture that we created down here. If it clips itself like it's done here, just tap on it and unclip it. We're going to go to our colors and grab the middle color in the far right column. And our brush wants to be set to a particular kind of brush, which you might not have actually thought about using for this one. We're going to go ahead and we're going to use elements. We're going to use the flames brush. Now we've got the brush size set to 45%. This is a really intriguing brush to use. But if we go ahead and set the blend mode of this layer from normal to color dodge, we should be able to create some really awesome, like magical lines. Now, there is a shape to it. Let me draw a line. See this shape on the edge of my brush? That's the shape that you draw with. And depending on how you start your line, look at how it rotates, like that's horizontal almost, and that's almost vertical. So take a look at these lines and see that's how that brush works. So we can go ahead and just have a couple of attempts. You're not going to nail it first time, but really lightly make your way off of the sort of staff here and try and look for an angle. I don't want mine horizontal. I want mine a little bit more kind of vertical, and run these lines off like so, creating these really awesome glowy lines, like a little something like this, and let that one run off to the side there. We can go ahead and create like a couple that run away off to this side, you know, a little bit different, a little bit lighter with pressure as well. Like they don't all have to be exactly the same every time you create one. They could be really wobbly like that, and they don't have to be super smooth and make their way out in the same sort of fashion. So have some fun just creating some really awesome magical beam lines here. And this brush is awesome for it. Again, my pressure is extremely light. So again, adjust where needs be. I don't like it when they're particularly large like that. I like them to be like a little bit smaller. I could obviously make the brush size a little bit smaller, but I'm just twisting the brush there a couple of times to create these really awesome wiggly lines in here. And then maybe I'll create like a stray off from there as well, until you create this awesome glowing effect from our subject. And as it runs over the colors, it changes color in the sort of distance and stuff. And I think it just looks fantastic how it just glows like that. Now, before we do our kind of final effects, adding in some really glowy look to it and some noise, etc., I need you to take a look at your design and triple check that you're happy with everything. So for me, for example, I like to keep these in the video. I'm going to open up my sky group. I'm going to go ahead and where I've got my sky in the background there, I might go ahead and swipe the sort of nebula to the left and change the blend mode of it to the option of overlay, just to maybe sort of add in additional color in here. So if I turn that on and off, I can see now that the sky has got a little bit more color in it. I could even potentially do that with the smaller lines that I created in there, just to make it a little bit more blue, a little bit more colorful. And I could even go ahead and grab now all of my skylines, so all the blue rather than the background, and maybe even scale that up in size, make that a little bit bigger, just adding in a little bit, maybe a little bit rotation potentially in here, just to add in some larger amount of color that spreads a little bit further in our sky. I can maybe even bring that down a little bit too. That looks pretty cool. I'm really happy with how that looks. So once you're happy, again, bokeh's included and all the little line marks down here, triple check that you're happy with how all those little lines are just drifting away from our subject. Do you need to go back in? So we'll go into our glows. We'll open up this layer here with all the glow lines on it. Go to my color. I'll grab the top color in the 5th column, which is the same one as that layer. We'll go back to luminance and the light pen. So I'm just going to quickly add in some additional smaller strokes here and there in the gap. So now I've got my subject. I can maybe go ahead now and just add in a few more around them. Try and just add in like a real focus almost in the middle, but just seeing if I can get rid of some repetition as well. Like I'm looking and thinking, can I direct some lines in different angles here and there, just to sort of throw in a few strays, essentially, like some streaks here and there, some light little streaks. And when I say light, I mean as in pressure, just additional little lines to throw, you know, content up and away from whatever's happening underneath here. So a few lines in here I think look fantastic, add in some little extra details. Overall though, I'm really happy. So once you are happy as well, what we need to go ahead and do is we need to turn off our area here at the top. So this is our foreground. So we're going to grab our foreground, swipe from left to right on all of the layers up to our guide and group them together. You can rename it if you want to. You can call it foreground. And then we can go ahead and collapse the group down and turn it off. We'll go ahead and we'll swipe down with 3 fingers on the design and go to the option of copy all. We'll swipe down with 3 fingers again and go to the option of paste. Take a look at your layers. Where did it drop it in? It dropped it above your foreground. So drop it underneath your foreground group here and then bring back in your foreground. So now we have a layer that has everything of our design on it. We're then going to go ahead and do a few different effects. We're going to go to our adjustments. We're going to go to Gaussian blur and swipe from left to right and add in a 10% Gaussian blur. We're going to tap on our adjustments, tap on it again and go to the option of noise. Swipe from left to right and add in a 10% amount of noise here. You can see my settings at the bottom if you need to match up to that. Tap on your adjustments when you're done. Then go ahead and go to the layer, tap on it and change the blend mode to the option of lighter color, or you can grab lighten. Either are exactly the same pretty much. You can grab lighten or lighter color. And now you should, if you take a look at your design, your dragon now should have this kind of glowy kind of effect to it. It's a bit diffused. And if you turn it on and off, you can see the difference. Look at that. So you can pick in your design what you're most happy with. You can go ahead and redo it. You can undo it. You can see and take a look at the difference. So for me, I'm really happy with how that looks and I like it with the effect. I'm going to leave it on. I'm going to go ahead and go full screen with 4 and we end up with today's finished design. So I hope you enjoyed this dragon theme design. As always, make sure to tag me in your finished creations over on Instagram and come and join my Discord community. It's completely free and you can come and share your work with other active members of the Procreate space. It's completely free to join again and the link to it is in the description down below. So let me know in the comments down below what you thought of today's design. Drop a like while you're down there and of course subscribe for weekly Procreate tutorials. But if you want even more tutorials from me, you can come and join me over on Patreon, where I've been posting 3 exclusives every single month to my Patreon supporters and the catalogue just continues to grow. So check that out using the link in the description down below. We're at over 90 exclusive tutorials at the time of recording. You can also get your name featured in videos, early access and sneak peeks and much, much more. So hit the link in the description down below and come and show your support for the channel. And if you like this video here on YouTube, you'll probably like this one on the screen now. Thank you so much for watching. Have a wonderful day and I'll see you in the next one.